Mongrel intruder.
The Land of Shadow is pretty scary, I mean. Now obviously the base game also had some of the areas that were very horrifying, and when you go and take a look at the locations, you know what kind of stuff happened over there. However, those jar caves in Elden Ring's DLC were way too over the board. I cannot tell you how much they scared me when I was exploring them. But everything else aside, the DLC is visually beautiful. Some of the areas in the DLC are just so amazingly designed, and the colors pop out so well that when you stand in a spot and the lighting just hits perfectly, you can just have your character stand there and people will genuinely just think that it's your wallpaper, not your character standing in the middle of a video game. I just genuinely feel like FromSoft is at a point in terms of art design that they are so far ahead of so many other studios that you can just guarantee when playing a FromSoft game that you're just gonna get stunned by something that they're gonna create in the world, and you'll genuinely feel like that is something that's missing from some other game that you enjoy a lot. I really appreciate how much story is being told by the visuals that are presented to you, because not only that makes you appreciate the visuals more, you're also learning using different senses. You don't have to just read or hear from the cutscenes what took place in the Land of Shadows. You can actually take a visual representation of what happened and how it probably went down and what the consequences of all of it are. And this is just something that was carried on from the base game. It's not something that was new, that was presented to us in the DLC. Even in the base game, you get to see so many places, so many items that just show you the wars that took place, the aftermath of the wars, and what all happened to, all the communities that were present in the lands between. And for me, that actually plays a major role into why I like the DLC's creation of the world so much. It did not try to be something that it wasn't, it just elaborated and expanded on what it actually was, which is what a DLC should be. Now, speaking of the base game and the size of the DLC compared to the base game, it was supposed to be roughly around the size of Limgrave, but I do feel like we have something a bit more than that. And one of the reasons for that is how many areas there are in the Land of Shadow and how they used the verticality to their advantage. This whole place just feels like a massive dungeon. The amount of places you can reach without even actually going to having fight a major boss is insane. You can do so much travel because, well, an open world game, without actually having to go through any major obstacles. And once you start on your journey to just go and look around, you start to realize that this map is vast. It has a lot of areas, and sometimes to get to one area from the other, the ways are just a little bit weird. I also feel like the use of verticality allows for an easy showcase of what's to come and what you will find yourself into. Like, if you start up in the middle, you can see what's about to come in the highlands in front of you. And then if you just look behind you, there's a beautiful place with some blue flowers. There's another place with red flowers. There's those big guys that one of them is in front of you. You get to see a picture of what's about to come. And all of this is able to give you a view that appeals to the eye and also makes you excited because you see an area and now you want to get to it. This brings in a certain amount of excitement for exploration. You look at an area and now you feel like you want to go and check for every single corner just to see if there's possibly another way to either a new possible area, or there's a hidden cave or a dungeon, maybe a weapon, or maybe there's a teeny tiny bit of lore piece that may get featured in the next Vati video. You'll know what I'm talking about, especially if you have gone into Shadowkeep and you tried to get to all the ledges or rooms that you possibly saw from the other side. This place is massive. It has 2 entrances and it leads up to one too many bosses. It leads to 2 whole another areas. And did I say that my favorite boss also sits in this area? Hello? Shadowkeep is beautiful. I absolutely love this area, and I just want to mention quickly here that it has overtaken, for me personally, Stormvale and Lindell at being the best dungeon or just the best area to explore in Elden Ring. Now, obviously, the enemies inside this area kinda make me want to disagree with my own statement, but hey, at the end of the day, I absolutely loved my stay in Shadowkeep. Chef's kiss, seriously. The new music seems to be representing the areas pretty well, and I overall liked it. I wouldn't say it was one of the biggest highlights, at least the open world music. I'm not talking about the boss music yet, but the open world music, I feel like it was just good, and it wasn't something great, or it wasn't something that stood out a lot, in my opinion. But overall, I feel like it manages to complement the areas just as much as is required. That all being said though, I have one major complaint from the overall DLC, and that is just the lack of nighttime use in the DLC. We had some unique bosses that only showed up at the night times in the base game. I did not get to see any of that in the DLC. The only thing that, as far as I know, we can see at nighttime in the DLC are the larval tears, and they're okay, but them being an item that is a limited amount already pisses me off enough, and then them being the only item that is the new addition into the nighttime of the DLC was really enough to make me say, nah, nighttime just does not make a difference in the DLC at all. The DLC also gave us a lot of cool new enemies, and some of them are downright scary and terrifying to fight, when some are just, copycats of their counterparts from the base game. But the new enemies, as soon as you enter the DLC, you get on your horse because you just want to run after that big golem. You come across this dude, and this dude does not play around at all, let me tell you. I still have not figured out an efficient way to fight these guys, and honestly, like, as much as I'm scared of them, I feel like they're such a cool enemy. And I would probably put the Black Knights, the Fire Knights in Shadowkeep, and the Horned Warrior, technically all of which are the enemies that I do not want to go toe-to-toe with unless absolutely needed. I feel like they're all beautifully designed, and they just make you feel on the edge even when you're just exploring through some of these areas, and they make you try and learn the fight patterns instead of just overpowering them with your overpowered gear that you brought over from the base game. They make you learn them, they make you appreciate the design, the attack patterns that they bring into the combat system. But there's also these little happy guys that, kinda remind me of jellyfish, but also their attacks are a little bit weird. And then to round it all off, they brought the big heads from Bloodborne, which I was okay-ish with until I realized that you cannot just attack them from distance and be done with it. You actually have to go near them, parry them, and only then you're able to do damage to them. In any case, I do feel like there's a lot of good new enemies, and all these enemies spread across the entire map. They do make it feel like it is a unique new place. They make the DLC feel new, they make it feel unique, and they make you appreciate the enemy design that FromSoft has brought to us just a little bit more. The only problem I guess a lot of people might have with these enemies is how tough they are compared to the base game. They really make you want to learn the combat just a little bit more, make use of the items that you get throughout the game so that you have that edge over them. And for the most part, I think I can get behind that. I feel like if these enemies offer just a little bit more variety in the moveset that give people a little bit more engagement for just the open world enemies, it's really good. You have a lot more to learn, to get through, and to appreciate, in my opinion, when the common enemies around you are also like designed from scratch and they have some cool stuff about them. Now the same thing can be said about the mini bosses as well. There are pretty good amount of new cool mini bosses in the dungeons and some just here and there, and all these mini bosses are trying to just do is showcasing the capability that FromSoft has in creating all these not needed but just there to make you feel more engaged with the game and provide more content for you, just so that you don't just play through the story, finish the DLC in 2 hours and be done with it. No, you have cool little mini bosses spread across the map and now you can go fight them. The furnace golems, I did not like them. They are very cool. Design-wise, I really don't have any complaint. They look amazing. The way they just walk around, it's very intimidating. But fighting them is a bit of an issue. Some of them do offer spaces where you can go up and you can just shoot pots in their furnace, and that is an easy kill. But fighting them on the foot, just whacking at their ankles for so long, that's pretty annoying. I did see a lot of people also complain about mini bosses brought back from the base game. Like, I think the biggest example would be the Deathbird and the Tibia Mariner. I'm totally fine with those as well. At least the Tibia Mariner had a cool part about him. But the Deathbird, while it just felt exactly like the Deathrite Bird from the base game, it didn't offer anything new. I'm okay with that. I feel like it's just a cool throwback to the base game, and you don't really miss much, and you still feel like, yes, you are in the Elden Ring world, you have not left it. So I am okay with these mini bosses and these enemies being brought back from the base game, but I can also understand why some people are not okay with that. They feel like it's just more of what they already have been through for the past 2 years. And I guess Deathrite Bird being one of the bosses that came back, not all of them people are going to be appreciative of that. And I'm just going to say it as well that it was a pretty boring fight, to be honest. Like, maybe just like the Tibia Mariner had that one trick about him, the Deathrite Bird didn't really have any trick about it. And I feel like maybe just if it had 1 or 2 new movesets that got sprinkled in, and maybe remove the bad parts about it, so that at least even if the face of it is copied into the game, the movesets are unique enough that people are able to appreciate it. But not a major complaint. I'm totally okay with it for the most part, and I'll just appreciate what's new and just enjoy those bosses. However, that brings us to the main part of the DLC, the main remembrance bosses. My goodness, these bosses are really pushing on that combat system that Elden Ring has to offer. And some of the combos, they just go forever and ever. And you're just waiting there like, okay, dodge, 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 one attack, dodge, 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 dodge. And it gets annoying for some people. I can totally understand that. But overall, I feel like the new bosses are done pretty well. Like, it's just something that FromSoft is very good at. So I would have expected all the bosses to be the pinnacle and all the bosses to serve as the main anchor point of selling the DLC to people and be like, oh, here, you want tough enemies, you want cool enemies to fight with? Well, we have the right recipe for you. Come play this game and enjoy it. Now, they used Mesmer to pretty much sell the DLC throughout the trailer campaign, and I was pretty sold on Mesmer, but my god, when I played and fought Mesmer, I am in love. He's outright my favorite boss in all of Elden Ring. This is something, because I just mentioned that Shadow Keep is my favorite area, and now the main boss of that area is also my favorite boss in the entire game. They really put their heart and soul into that area and that boss. I feel like Mesmer is such a well done boss, and he just has everything that one could ask from a boss from Elden Ring. Like, 10 out of 10 boss for me. I love his moveset, I love his lore, I love his cutscenes, I love the way he just, grabs me, shoves that spear in me. I love being impaled by Mesmer. What else can I say about that? And then we come to the new dragon boss, which is so well done. When I fought against Placidusax, I feel like the whole arena, just going back in time, it was so good and it felt so cinematic that I ignored how many of the mechanics of that fight were so terrible that all you do is, as soon as the fight starts, you go to the back, you just whack at his tail till you kill him. Bale is not that. I feel like Bale's fight is easier, or I found it easier to fight Bale when being in front of him and whacking on his head. And that just makes the fight so much more enjoyable. You see all the attacks coming. He's quick, but all of the attacks feel fair, maybe except for when he flies and throws a bunch of stuff at you and you just have to like strafe around. I kind of understand that it's more or less done for the coolness sake, but also at the same time it was kind of unnecessary. It just feels unnatural, but overall I feel like Bale is so good. Like, he's such a better fight than Placidusax. In my opinion, he's the best dragon fight in Elden Ring. I have not played a Dark Souls, so I cannot compare him to any of the bosses from that game, but from Elden Ring, any of the other dragons that I have fought, he's just best dragon fight. And if Bale himself wasn't enough, we get alongside with it, and this recipe just works. This recipe was so good and it was cooked to perfection, and I absolutely enjoyed it. Other than these two, I guess if we're just talking about the bosses that I enjoyed, Midra was a really cool boss, but then he's such a hidden boss that I don't even know how many people actually managed to find him without looking up a guide on YouTube. It took me forever to find that boss because he's locked behind a dungeon, and I mean, so is Bale, but still, it's just so crazy. Like, the amount of emphasis that they put to go find these bosses, you have to go find these hidden caves and dungeons, go finish them, and at the end, it's not just gonna be a wall and the thing to send you back to the front. No, it's gonna be a gate to a new area where you're gonna fight maybe another cool boss. That is just so cool. And as much as I didn't enjoy Abyssal Woods because, well, it's a scary place, it's massive, I loved Midra's fight. It is so cool. I just wish I was also a Lord of Frenzy when I fought him. That would have been even more cinematic. But for what Midra is, I feel like he's one of my top 3 bosses in the game. Ralana would probably come close, but I feel like still Midra was more enjoyable personally for me over Ralana. Now, there's a couple of other main bosses that I'm not sure like if I have a lot to talk about. The first boss that I played against was Divine Beast. Really cool design, but I also felt like immediately, like I felt like the camera needed a bit more adjustment. Maybe when you lock on to the Divine Beast, the camera can go back a little so you have more field of vision or something. Just something so that I'm not battling the camera as much as I'm battling the boss. But also I can understand how it can be a little bit tough to balance these kinds of fights. Maybe they can come up with something in future and those kinds of fights will be better. But overall, I feel like Divine Beast, the idea of going through elements is also a really cool fight. Lack of cutscenes is something that pained me when I fought against Romina. She's just chilling there as soon as you enter the boss room. I was so expecting dropping my controller down that, okay, now we're gonna get a cutscene and I can just watch that. Nope. Immediately you just see the boss and she just charges at you and you're in the boss fight. Bam. No cutscene. So that is something I guess maybe they need to work on a little bit. Maybe at least give the important bosses some cutscenes to make the whole boss thing look like a boss thing. Like, make it look special to me. Don't just expect for me to assume that it's special. Make it special. But the next boss is the final boss, Consort Radon. And my god, that boss has divided opinions. Like, I totally understand both the sides because I do feel like he has a moveset that can be very fun to learn because it's so complex that it gives people something that they can just, you know, keep on hitting again and again and again. They have to put in the hours to learn it, But then at the end of the day, you look at people who are actually skilled at the game, it didn't take them very long to learn the boss. They were posting the no-hit videos like in 2 days into the DLC. And then there were people who are decent at the game, and then it took them a couple of attempts, or well, maybe a couple dozen of attempts to get to the point where they can beat the final boss. And even they felt that the boss was a little over the top. There's a lot of reasons why that is the case, because he does not have a lot of openings. If you're somebody who cannot take advantage of all the single openings, if you don't know when to press R1, how many times to press the R1, and when to start pressing the roll button, you will struggle against that boss. Or you just have such an overpowered build that you're able to overpower the final boss, you're gonna have not so good time. And then you get to summon Ansbach, which in my opinion you should. He just has such a cool dialogue when the fight starts and when the fight ends, that he should be the part of that fight. It makes sense lore wise. I don't care much about the other guy, the Tolier, whatever, but Ansbach, I want him to be the part of the fight, but at the same time he's bumping the HP of the boss by 60%. And given how hard the final boss already is, that HP bonus that he gets makes it so that I don't want to summon Ansbach anymore. Which is such a strange concept, considering you're able to summon Hornsent inside Mesmer's arena, and Mesmer does not get any boost from him being there, but then at the same time, Radahn gets a boost from Ansbach being there. I'm not sure. I guess they just wanted to end it on a boss that gives people everything that they've ever wanted. Maybe they were trying to go for something like Ishin the Sword Saint, where the final boss is just so hard, and if you learned everything about Elden Ring, the parries, the perfect dodges, you'll be fine. But if you didn't, then, well, you're in trouble. And my god, a lot of people were in trouble, and I'm one of them. So my allegiance lies with the final boss is a little bit too much. And if that is not enough, that is the only boss I've faced so far in any FromSoft game, which I've only played 3, but he's the only boss that tanked my FPS. He made me feel like I didn't even upgrade my GPU. Why is that even part of the game? I'm not sure what kind of computer this game was tested on, but clearly some of his moves need a bit of toning down in the graphic usage, because it's a little bit too much. And I can see some of the particles, you can just get rid of them. If my frames are dropping so much that I'm actually facing the wall instead of facing at the attack, I don't care how cool that attack is. Maybe just get rid of that attack. That's about it for my rant for the final boss and the things I feel like that can be done better about him. But again, I am not somebody who makes games. I am just somebody who plays the games, and I want a boss that I can conquer, but I also don't want a boss that is just 2 shots. He is the final boss of a DLC after all, and people are going to be over leveled. People have fought the bosses with the Elden Ring combat mechanic for over 2 years, and people are well trained, or at least are expected to be well trained with that combat. So you do want to have an over the top boss to at least keep people engaged, but I feel like they just overdid it. Considering Millennia was the hardest boss in the base game and she was just totally optional, that was fine with a lot of people, but Consort is the main boss of the DLC. He's the final boss, so you have to beat him to beat the DLC, and people for the most part want to do it themselves instead of relying on people who just bring in a shield and a thrusting weapon and are just going book, 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 book. It just becomes boring, which means the boss forces a certain playstyle, and not everyone is gonna find fun in that. Now, let's talk about the new weapons and Ash of Wars that we got in the DLC. I have not been able to play with all of them, considering there are like a little over 100 new weapons added to the game. But the ones that I have tried, which include like backhand swords, Milady, the Great Katana, they are all amazing. For the DLC, they all feel great. However, I also realized that when you take them back to the base game, some of them just outright feel bullying instruments when used on the base game bosses. They are strong, they're quick, especially the backhand blades, the Ashafar, it just works so well, and the moveset is so good that on the base game bosses you just feel like you're so dominating, and you can kill those bosses much easily once you take them back to the base game in New Game Plus, or just if you start a fresh playthrough and give yourself some weapons or the Ashes of War from the DLC to go through the base game. You're gonna have a blast. You're gonna feel like you're the actual Elden Lord because of how good those new weapons and the new skills that we got for the DLC are. We also got a couple of new talisman. It's again a little too hard to fit in all of them into a singular video, but some of them are really cool. Some of them probably I'm never gonna use. Now there are some talisman that, you know, some of the builds were missing, and you can look at them and then be like, okay, this was the final puzzle piece that was missing from my build, and try them. And then the new armor sets, they are designed beautifully. They just go so hard. They did not have to go so hard. And honestly, like, if I had to play the game and if I only had the armor sets from the DLC, I would be totally fine with it. The combinations, they just work so well. And even if you don't talk about the combination, if you just talk about a full armor set, they are so good. They are designed beautifully. And that just goes on to show how much love and care FromSoft actually wanted to put in each and every single aspect of this DLC, which I can appreciate any single day. Now, in terms of incantations and sorceries, we actually got more incantations than we got sorceries. And not gonna lie, I was so ready to just absolutely dunk on Rain of Fire, but while I was making this video, it got buffed, and I was gonna sing a lot of praises for the Thorns, and it got nerfed. Overall, I feel like the incantation scene is a little bit better now. Sorceries, they're okay-ish. I mean, there was one sorcery that was completely broken. It got a little bit fixed. It's still strong, but it's just not as broken anymore. However, I do feel like this balances out the sorceries and incantations from the base game, and when you compare them together, I feel like now you have a good balance of both, and both the runs will feel very fair and fun if you go through the base game and the DLC together. We also ended up receiving some new tiers for the Flask of Wondrous Physique, and some of them are okay, some of them I'm probably never gonna use. However, everyone's favorite child ended up being the Deflecting Heart tier, and people are already begging for that to be a talisman, but I feel like the 5-minute length more than makes up for it, and if that means that you can actually have that 5th talisman for something, it's probably not a bad thing to do. I guess the only problem is sometimes you want to use something like that when exploring and not just for boss fights, which is why I suppose people want it as a talisman. But the thing is, it is probably the best new tier for the physique that got available with the DLC. But yeah, that's about it. I have not tested and played around with everything, but I am excited about my subsequent playthroughs where I either go faith only or sorcery only, so I can get more time with each of these spells and incantations, so I can have a better idea of what the new stuff that was added looks like. Obviously there's going to be still some flops, and there's going to be still some spells that are just outright great, like Pest Thread Spears, I know already are just awesome on big body bosses because of them hitting multiple times. But yeah, I'm not somebody who's played around with everything, so I cannot give an honest take on all the weapons, but the ones that I've tried, man, they're good. Now, I just want to quickly mention two things before I start on with the conclusion. One of them being how they made the runbacks to the bosses in the DLC even shorter. Like, Elden Ring only had a couple of boss runs that were maybe a little annoying, where you could say, oh man, I have to go through this again. But In the DLC, I did not see that at all. In fact, they even added mini checkpoints within dungeons sometimes so that you can just revive at the stake of America and not have to go through the entire dungeon again in case you die, which I can really appreciate. I feel like it's really a step in the right direction. Like, I personally was never a huge fan of long boss runs, and from what I've heard, they used to be even worse. And I like FromSoft taking the valid criticism against their mechanic and improvising on it, and just removing anything that feels extra or unnecessary that should not be there, and just emphasizing on that boss design more, which is what they have always done, and they have always been great, but now they just feel more and more polished, except for maybe the final boss. Another thing that I really was happy about with the DLC was the NPCs. I was not expecting some of these NPCs to be as good story-wise and character-wise as they were. I thought they were really good and well designed. The characters look well written, and obviously Sir Ansbach and Egon took the show for themselves for the most part, but I also just want to say that Letta, Moore, and even Hornsent, I personally really like them, and I can never forget how Sir Dryleaf Dane just asked me to say nothing and do a gesture to fight him. So cool. Anyways, that brings me to my final thoughts on the DLC and how I feel about it. I feel like the world design overall, the character design, and the story is what anybody would expect from FromSoft DLCs. And the bosses and enemy design, again, are just over the top. They're beautiful. They seem like they were actually, looked at properly and designed properly, for the most part. But there's just such an amazing lineup for enemies and bosses that were added to the DLC, and people now have a lot more content to just play around with, just have fun learning, or have fun their ass getting beaten by. And just to make your fun a little bit better, they added a bunch of new stuff. Now there's a lot of new weapon categories that you can have fun with. Some of these categories only have like a few weapons, and that's totally fine for now. Maybe they'll add more in the future. I'm not sure if there's another DLC coming, or maybe they'll add a small expansion. You never know what FromSoft is going to do, but I do feel like having the potential of having a different weapon categories so that you can add more stuff into them is really good. And that also makes it so that you can have a lot of variety into your build. The new incantations, some of them are just great, they're beautiful, and some of them are amazing to use, and even the damage numbers are solid, and some of them are too slow for the boss fights because the bosses in the DLC are fast. However, if you can get them off, they're cool, they do some nice damage. Yeah, we will have our flops as usual. Not everything can be an S tier, but overall, I think I am very happy with the new stuff that was added into the DLC. Now, as for the bosses, I enjoyed all of them. I love the idea of having fast bosses that you have to deal with. The punish windows are small, the combos are long, and they are really pushing on that combat system of Elden Ring, and I'm not sure how far you can take this before you start to realize the shortcomings of the combat system. However, I am hopeful. I feel like these bosses are really good. They may give you a hard time compared to the normal base game bosses, but overall, you will enjoy your stay in the DLC against these bosses. The final boss needs adjustments with the hitboxes and some of that graphical stuff. I do not like my frames to drop when I'm fighting a boss. That is probably one thing that I will say FromSoft messed up. They just made a flawed boss, which they wanted to be over the top, but I feel like they added a little too many flaws into it because of the over the top behavior that they were looking for from that boss. One major problem I have with the DLC that I have not talked about yet is the ending. It feels hollow, it feels incomplete. I am not happy. I played through the entire DLC and I was super happy. I was very hopeful that this is gonna end on a great note, but when I got to the ending, killed the final boss, it just felt hollow. It felt like I had not achieved anything. The final cutscene is just boring and it does not elaborate on anything new. It's just an old cutscene. Oh, be my consort, which is whatever. Like, you know, at some point in the story, I would have appreciated it, but not at that final point, in my opinion. Maybe add another cutscene, and I would have also personally liked to see, like, maybe Miquella adding the soul of Radahn into dead body of Mohg that's just laying on the ground, and then he stands up and brings his swords, instead of just him standing there, you know, with his swords shoved into the ground, and then he pulls them out. It's also cool, but I feel like it would have been cooler to see actually Radahn's soul being added to Mohg's body, so that you can have a better idea of, oh yeah, it is Mohg's body, rather than just having one of Radahn's eye kind of not visible, so you just assume that it's because Mohg's eye was damaged, and then you just see like some thorns on his arms, which, yeah, sure, it's something, but maybe you could have done a little bit more with that, with the showing part. I feel like they should have tried a little bit more with the boss design to actually represent the body of Mohg and soul of Radahn. Soul of Radahn is really coming out, but the body of Mohg, it's not really coming out as much as I would have liked to see it. That all being said though, I had a blast playing through this DLC. Obviously my first full series that I uploaded to YouTube, so it means a lot to me in that term. But apart from the ending and the final boss, I really don't see myself having any complaints from the DLC, and that is why I will end up giving this DLC 9.5 out of 10. I was gonna give it a 9. I do feel like the final boss is fixable, and given how FromSoft just added the horse ability in Elden Beast's arena after 2 years, I am hopeful, even though they never fixed Malenia getting heals from hitting the shields. I am hopeful that they will do something for the final boss in the upcoming patches. They just need some time to decide what needs to be done to make it balanced but still feel like a nice challenge for the players who are looking for that challenge. So that's all from me for the DLC. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the DLC as well. I will continue making more videos on the DLC, so make sure you hit the subscribe button to tune in for all of them, and I'll catch you guys in the next ones. See ya. Thank you.